Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Watchdogs Legion, Cold Reboot by Robbie Macniven. Narrated by Gemma Dawson. Part 1. Setup. 1. Bad morning. Thomas Bauer had a bullet in his gut. He could feel it there. It was agony. It made him want to double over, to clutch at his stomach and scream. Instead, he clenched his jaw and fumbled in his jacket pocket. His fingers were numb and shaking. He couldn't tell if it was because of the shock, or the pain, or the cold. It was so damn cold. An early January morning in Berlin. The only heat came from the fiery anguish in his lower torso and the blood he could feel, wet and warm, running down his legs. He managed to find his wallet and pull it free. His fingers were red and left stains on the soft leather as he opened it. It was almost impossible to think, but he forced himself to. For Freya. After what felt like a fumbling age, he managed to get a little dog-eared Polaroid free from its leather sheath. He dared snatch a look at it, at the small, smiling girl, freckled and pigtailed, now partially smeared with her father's blood. Fingers trembling, he lifted it to his lips and kissed it. Then he ripped it in half, crushed it, and dropped it over the edge of the bridge. It vanished into the ice-skimmed waters below. He heard footsteps on the wooden boards behind him, light and measured. He didn't turn around. Instead, he forced himself to keep looking down into the canal. The Jungfer Bridge wasn't where he had expected to die. It didn't have the grandiosity of the Friedrichsbrücke, with the towering dome of the Bode Museum behind it, or the Oberbaumbrücke and its two towers. The Jungferbrücke was a little canal crossing 25 metres from end to end, overlooked by hundreds of windows in dull apartment buildings on either side, its wooden boards now marked by Thomas's blood. The footsteps stopped beside him. He could hear a slight, wheezing rattle, unhealthy lungs struggling with the bitterness of the morning air. "Get on with it," Thomas growled in German. He braced for the end, closed his eyes, but instead of a second gunshot, he heard the flick of a lighter and smelled the addictive stink of a cigarette. He turned to face his killer, supporting himself on the bridge's railing. An unremarkable man, a little under 6 foot, cropped dark brown hair, slight stubble, over 30 years of age. Thomas had almost expected as much. This was the Gespenst, the ghost, a being infamous in Berlin's criminal underworld. He could not do what he did if he looked like anything other than a dull, ordinary person. The only points of vague interest were his eyes. They were grey, watery, though not disconcertingly so. At first, they appeared resigned, bored almost, but that wasn't entirely true. The disinterest could not quite hide the gleam of excitement. The ghost was enjoying this. Wordlessly, he drew on his cigarette, then offered it to Thomas. Thomas shook his head. "Bad for your health," he said. The ghost grunted with something that might have been amusement, then turned to one side, leaning on the railings next to Thomas and looking along the length of the canal. His cigarette smoke coiled languidly in the freezing air. "Does your employer want me to die this slowly?" Thomas demanded through gritted teeth, shivering now. He felt a spike of anger at the man's arrogance. "No," the Gespenst said, not looking at Thomas. "But a second bullet would be wasteful. You have a minute left, perhaps 2. My job is done." There was a thump as Thomas's wallet fell from his nerveless fingers and landed on the bridge's planks. He was too weak to try to retrieve it. It didn't matter anyway. All the IDs were fake. The only genuine connection was little Freya, now ripped in two and drifting along the Kupfergraben towards the main body of the River Spree. "Getting rid of the evidence, friend?" the ghost asked, moving away from the railing and kneeling in front of Thomas. He picked up the wallet and thumbed it, idly tossing cards out onto the bridge's planks. "You really think you can keep the rest of your family safe from me? My employer pays too well for them to remain hidden for long." Thomas tried to answer, but found he could not. He could taste blood, choking and metallic. He swallowed hard, but it kept coming. He realized he couldn't feel anything. The cold was gone, and so was the pain. Sudden tiredness overwhelmed him. He found it impossible to stand. He slumped slowly against the edge of the bridge, struggling to draw breath. He looked up and found himself gazing into the cold, watery eyes of a ghost. "You won't find her," Thomas Bauer managed to tell him as he died. "But if you do, she'll be ready for you." 2. Summons. Freya had hit her 100th bench press when the call she least wanted came through. It arrived courtesy of Chalmers, the owner of the gym she worked at. He was a decent enough guy when it came to employees he considered valuable, and Freya was his best personal trainer. That meant he didn't mind her using the equipment for an hour after the place had closed early on a Monday. It was her favourite time of the week, when she was left to her own devices. Ramstein blasting out over the speakers and no one to pester her. An opportunity to get a proper sweat and burn going. The 100th rep completed, she was starting her rest period when the ear-achingly loud rendition of Mein Herz brennt cut off. She stood up and turned fast, but it was only Chalmers, approaching her across the gym floor. "Sometimes I wonder what you do when you're not here, Frey," the thick-set Cockney said with a half-smile. "Because anyone who reacts that quickly to their music being turned off is a real piece of work." "You know me," Freya replied, trying to shrug off her own abruptness. "Just a single mum, trying to get by." Chalmers paused, looking at her thoughtfully. He had been well built when Freya had first started working for him, about 8 years ago, but was now locked into what she thought of as the body's doom spiral. No matter how hard he worked out, he couldn't quite keep himself as toned as he had once been, muscles steadily turning to fat and tension to slackness. At some point it was probably easier to give up. Freya was glad she had a decade or so to go before she started experiencing the same. "You need help?" Chalmers asked, his expression becoming serious. "Money? Want me to speak to your landlord?" "You offering me a raise?" "Calm down," he scoffed. "You said we'd talk about it this week." "Yeah, well, week's only begun. What do you want?" "Your optic's blowing up," Chalmers said, "rattling around inside your locker. Sounds like someone wants you in a hurry. Don't know why you don't just keep it on like most people." Freya masked her annoyance. An optic communicator's primary components were the tiny post implant that was inserted into the front of the ear and its processor, which attached unobtrusively over skin via neodymium magnet. However, it could also run a small hands-on device. Freya had left hers in her locker while she worked out and turned off her implant's receptors temporarily, meaning she wasn't getting incoming messages pinging up in the corner of her vision. They were being logged instead on that hands-on device. Most optics only allowed you to turn off receptors for 30 minutes at a time, but Freya had long ago bypassed the standard installation settings, and since the fall of Albion laws about optics remaining turned on had been relaxed somewhat, a lot of messages could mean any number of things, a few of them good. "I was finishing up," she said, retrieving her towel and wiping the back of her neck as she headed for the changing rooms. "Just going to leave me to put the weights away then?" Chalmers called after her. "It's your gym, big guy," Freya responded without turning. She opened her locker and retrieved her optics screen component before turning on the implant itself. There was a message from her son, Andrew, superimposing itself directly across her vision once she focused on it. It said he'd gotten onto the linguistics course he had applied for at the end of his first year at Bristol Uni. That, and 3 missed calls from Welland. 1 piece of good news then, and 3 bad. She put the unwelcome possibilities to the back of her mind and phoned Andrew to congratulate him. He was excited. His first year at university hadn't gone exactly to plan, at least initially. There had been the stress of summer resits, and he had struggled living away from home for the first time. Freya had done her best not to let on that she'd had just as rough a time without him around. The fact that he had gone on to higher education at all, though, made her fiercely proud. It was the best way out, she was certain, the most surefire means of breaking the Bauer family cycle and avoiding ending up like her, with scarred knuckles, an optic rammed with encryption and spyware, and a collection of fake IDs. "Professor Silkner is running this course," Andrew told her enthusiastically over the optic. "He's already said he'll consider being my supervisor for my dissertation next year." "He knows a smart guy when he sees one," Freya said, taking a moment to enjoy her son's exuberance. "You'll have to take time out of your busy academic schedule to explain to me exactly what linguistics actually means, though." "You're bilingual, Mum. Stop playing dumb," Andrew told her in German. She laughed before a bout of concern reasserted itself. "Are you all sorted for cash? Is your student loan still coming through?" "Yep, I've got some saved up. Enough to mean I don't have to get a job at the student union next year." "Then you're doing better than your mother. What about accommodation? Are those guys your friends with still looking for a flat together? Harry and what's-his-face?" "Yes, Mum. Stop worrying, I'm sorted." A dull tone beeped in Freya's ear before she could respond. She scanned her optics heads-up display and realised she had an incoming call from Welland. She dismissed it with an angry blink before resuming the conversation with Andrew, forcing herself to check maternal instincts. "It's my job to worry, kid. Your egg allergy hasn't been playing up, has it?" "No, Mum. I've had it all my life. It's not like I've only just found out about it." Okay. Congratulations on getting on the course. We'll chat later, and you can tell me more about it." "Sounds good," Andrew replied. Freya told him that she loved him before hanging up, then sent a terse message to Welland. "I'll be there in 40. Stop calling." She went through a stretch routine and had a quick shower before getting changed and heading out. Chalmers was preparing to lock up behind her. "Trouble ahead?" he asked as she walked past, apparently noticing her expression. "I'm looking forward to finding out," Freya replied. A part of her wanted to leave Welland to stew, but she avoided the temptation to head back to her flat before visiting him. In fairness, lately he'd been leaving her alone, giving her the distance she had requested. It had been a wild couple of years in London, with the rise and fall of Albion, the zero-day bombings, and the ensuing crackdowns and countermeasures. DedSec had been busier than she had ever known, and a few close escapes, with the law and with forces even more diabolical, had given her a moment of clarity. She had decided she wanted out, and she'd told Welland as much. Of course, leaving the world's most infamous underground hacker movement was easier said than done. The worst of the rush-hour traffic had worked its way through town by the time she left the gym, so she made good time on her scooter, making sure her digital cloak was activated, hiding her remote identity to anything that might be tracing her, from satellite imaging to drones and street cameras. It was a nasty, muggy evening, summer's last hurrah in the big city, North Islington grimy and perspiring in the close twilight. Drones whirred overhead, a counterpoint to the traffic on the ground. Most were food delivery services, transporting evening takeaways, though a few commercial flyers were still up, and there was one newscaster that hovered over the entrance to Finsbury Park. Freya kept her helmet visor down, a lifetime of hard-earned experiences coupled with natural Bauer instincts. It was no use having a digicloak if someone on the street had physical eyes on her or snapped a pic. She also knew well enough that the facial recognition tech on even the courier drones wasn't only used to ensure the right goods were delivered to the right people. She pulled up and parked outside Rajiv's corner shop, an unassuming store occupying a slender footfall between a tattoo parlour and a job centre plus just off Stroud Green Road. She slipped her optics hands-on component out of the pocket of her yellow leather jacket, double-checking that it was dead, corresponding with the deactivated chip in her ear. It was her standard practice, but tonight it had the added bonus of meaning Welland couldn't pester her anymore. Sometimes she wanted to throw the device away, dig out the chip beside her ear, and go completely off-grid. She knew that was a fantasy. There was no such thing as off-grid nowadays. They were all logged down somewhere. Someone was always watching. Besides, an optic with a full jailbreak and all the requisite DedSec installations, identity scramblers, a tracker null, fast uplink, and a clone interface was invaluable. If it fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't just be her life at risk. It could potentially bust a good chunk of the whole system open. She kept her helmet on until she was stepping through the shop's front door. Rajiv's establishment was unremarkable, a long cramped space with teetering shelves ram-packed with goods, all under the store's harsh buzzing lights. It looked quiet tonight. That was good. Rajiv, a short, balding man in a stained paisley jumper, was behind the till when Freya walked in, her arrival announced by the tinkle of the store's bell. He didn't look up. "Got any cookie dough mixture?" Freya asked him. He continued counting change, finishing sorting the till's trays and slotting it shut before finally looking up at her. "We might have some in the back." "AJ!" The exclamation was directed at his son, who was stacking shelves down one of the aisles. "Come mind the front while I find some cookie dough for this lovely lady," Rajiv said, before adding to Freya, "It might be quicker if you helped me look. There's a lot of boxes back there." Freya followed him through a narrow door behind the counter into a storage space that was even more cluttered than the main floor. She made sure to shut the door behind her as Rajiv shifted a stack of boxes packed with biscuits. Beneath them was a small trapdoor. "You're late," Rajiv said, stooping with a groan of effort and unlatching it. "What's got Welland so riled up?" Freya asked. "Not my job to know, cookie dough lady, but I hope you find what you're looking for down there." He hauled up the covering, exposing a tight, almost vertical flight of stairs that led down into darkness. "You and me both," Freya said, before beginning to descend. Rajiv shut the door above her, and there was a horrible second of total darkness before a light flicked on automatically. Freya stepped down into the shop's cellar, a place as untidy as the storeroom above, but with the added bonus of being musty and a bit dank. She worked a stack of pallets out from the wall, far enough to expose the damage done by what looked like a sledgehammer. A section of bricks and plaster had been smashed through, leading to a dark and uninviting gap. Freya ducked into it, feeling a slight ache in her shoulders. She hadn't anticipated having to practically crawl around the depths of North London after today's reps. Welland had better have a good reason for calling her in, especially since he hadn't for months. More lights came on, illuminating the way ahead. She was in an old corridor with a circular roof and walls, white tiles faded to yellow, arrows pointed both ways, twinned with signs indicating platform numbers or exits. It was an old tube line, a branch of the Northern Metropolitan from the 60s that had fallen into disuse and been sealed off. London was a warren like that, a city with a Hades-like underworld of subways, sewers, basements and crypts, running over, under, and sometimes even through one another. Expansions of the tube itself were constantly unearthing everywhere from medieval plague pits to Second World War bomb shelters, and in among it all, amidst the underground empire of detritus, grime and human history, DedSec made its nest. She headed down the tunnel, her footsteps echoing in the dead space. At the far end, a metal latticework gate was drawn over in front of an empty ticket booth. Faded posters were plastered on the facade showing the price of line fares alongside advertisements for museum exhibits, films and decades-old West End plays. Above the booth, contrasting with the time-gnawed relics, was a modern semicircular security camera that gleamed like a cyclopean eye. Freya knew it wasn't the only piece of tech in the tunnel. The gate itself was fitted with both electronic sensors and scramblers that would alert those beyond to any live devices passing through, as well as frying said devices if they were left on and didn't possess the necessary digital handshake. She paused in front of the barrier and blew the camera a condescending kiss. There was a buzzing sound and the thud of an automatic lock giving way. The gate clanged as it unlatched. Freya pushed it, grimacing at the squeal of rusting hinges, and stepped through. It banged shut and locked behind her. Past the booth was a short flight of stairs. A thrumming sound echoed up from below. It was swelteringly hot now. Freya always got the impression that she was descending into the bowels of some ugly, ancient monster whenever she ventured into Welland's lair. She unzipped the front of her yellow biker jacket. The steps led out onto the tube platform itself. The semicircular tunnel at either end had been bricked up, and most of the track had been layered over with timber boarding, extending the walk space and creating a box-like chamber. It was filled with signs of long-term occupation. There were a few commandeered old NHS bunk beds along the walls, outnumbered by rows of sleeping bags, and, near the centre of the former platform, a communal area consisting of ratty sofas and a trio of mismatched coffee tables holding a TV, a kettle, a mini fridge, a toaster and microwave, and a scattering of books, laptops and optic burners, plus the obligatory tangle of wires and chargers. At the far end of the walkway, a large power generator laboured continuously, providing the source of the thrumming and heat. Often when Freya visited, the place was busy with DedSec activists and those close to the organisation, coming and going or hiding out, but it seemed most people had something better to be doing on a Monday evening than visiting the North London hackerspace. Only a single person was present as Freya entered. He jumped up from one of the sofas and scurried over, a lean guy who hadn't quite yet thrown off the gangly awkwardness of late adolescence. "Where is he?" Freya asked. His name was Mike, a German kid, and one of the more recent recruits, who, from what she could pick up, was keeping a low profile while his flat was being thoroughly debugged following a brush with the authorities. "In the office," Mike answered, scratching at his greasy, unwashed hair. "He seems stressed, like even more than usual." Freya huffed. She knew there was no point in asking Mike what Welland wanted with her. The kid didn't have that kind of clearance yet. "Keep this until I'm done," she told him, and tossed him her scooter helmet. He caught it clumsily as she strode past, towards a metal door set in the flank of the platform's wall. It swung open as she approached. Welland, her least favourite freedom fighter, was waiting for her. 3. Proposals. Welland looked tired, but that wasn't unusual. He was dressed in trackies and a Lacoste hoodie that looked like it had seen cleaner days. His usual stubble had grown out into a proper beard, and his locks were becoming straggly and unkempt. "You look like crap," Freya told him. "Don't," he responded, beckoning her inside. She entered. The room was the old station master's office. It had been repurposed into the nerve centre of the North London operation, with 4 PCs and a dozen monitors. Everything from mining cryptocurrency to maintaining surveillance, often via hacked feeds, was conducted here. He sat behind the main desk, in front of a large map of London pinned up on the wall. "Tea?" he asked. "We going to be long?" "Depends how willing you are to cooperate." "I'll have an Earl Grey then," Freya said, "with milk and 1 sugar." "You're an animal," Welland said in response to such an idea, before shouting to Mike. The kid stuck his head nervously round the door. "Earl Grey, milk and 1 sugar, and a PG Tips, just milk." Mike scurried off to make the brews. Freya doubted there were many members of DedSec that would have so obediently acted as literal tea caddies to anyone else in the organisation, but Mike was clearly still uncertain regarding his new life of hacktivism, and Welland was taking advantage. He'd always liked making the new recruits run around after him. Hell, he'd even tried it on Freya, back when she had first been starting out. It hadn't quite worked out for him, though. "Going to tell me what's got you all bothered, then?" she asked, taking an uninvited seat across the desk from Welland and draping her leather jacket over its back. She watched him carefully as she did so, trying to gauge his mood. It was always good to know how far she could push him. She suspected he was trying to work out the same thing with her. DedSec had no real hierarchy as such. Rigid command systems were anathema to such a loose group of underground rebels and agitators. Some, however, had a talent for coordinating the efforts of others. Welland was one such person. He was in his mid-40s now. A little older than Freya, but still displayed the sort of deep, slow-burning commitment to the ideologies of individual freedoms and social justice that had, after years of running successful operations, left him more or less a respected top dog among those who considered themselves DedSec in North London. His charisma was always a big hit with the recruits and low-level informers, runners and street cranks, and to be fair, he worked himself and his fellow activists hard. Not that he'd had much of a choice in recent years. It had been a deadly time for everyone involved in the movement. There had been losses, some of them long-term volunteers who had ended up behind bars or worse. That was part of the reason Freya wanted out, and had told Welland as much months earlier. She wanted to live to see Andrew graduate from Bristol. "I've got a job for you," Welland told her. "Yeah, I gathered." Freya leaned back in her chair. "You blew my optic up to get me here, but now you're being awfully cagey. How bad is it?" "As bad as it gets," Welland admitted. "Then why are you asking me to do it?" "Because you're the best one for it." "I promise I've looked for alternatives." Freya didn't like where this was heading. It confirmed the bad feeling she'd had since realising Welland was trying to contact her. The door opened. Mike came in, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and placed them down on the desk. Welland watched him carefully until he had scurried out again. "It's Germany," Welland said after the door shut. "Or more specifically, Berlin." "Yeah, bad start," Freya said. "There's a group there that needs our help. They call themselves M-Bahn. They're to all intents and purposes the final branch of DedSec in Central Europe." "Good for them." Freya picked up the mug that looked like Earl Grey and blew on it. "What's that got to do with me?" She was being deliberately obtuse. Berlin was her birthplace, but she hadn't been there in almost 30 years, and she had no intention of going back. "We need someone competent, with local knowledge, to assist them as they find their feet," Welland said. "You've got both of those bases covered." "Competent is an interesting word choice," Freya said. "If they're just setting up, it'll be technical expertise they're after. You know I'm not one of your hacker nerds. Why would they need muscle unless they're already running foul of bigger, badder groups, or the authorities?" "You wouldn't be going alone," Welland said pointedly. "William would go with you." Freya put the tea back down. Surprise gave way to anger. She looked hard at Welland. "Are you taking the piss?" she asked. "No. You said what they'd need most was technical knowledge, and you're right. Will is perfectly suited for that. He's experienced, and he's fluent in German." "He's also my arsehole ex-husband," Freya snarled. "None of us are perfect, but together you're ideal for this. You're what M-Bahn needs." "No, absolutely not. It would be a dereliction of duty on my part if I didn't ask you both." "Have you spoken to him already?" "Not yet. Not in full, anyway. It's a work in progress." Freya scoffed. She hadn't imagined Welland would be this bold. He should have known better. "You know I haven't spoken to him in 4 years," she said. "Not since our son's 15th birthday. He hasn't even tried to get in touch." "Then you'll have plenty to catch up on." "I'm not doing it." Welland pursed his lips. Looking at her, she returned his gaze fiercely, daring him to keep trying. "Do you know what the current situation is in Germany?" he asked eventually. "Changing the angle of attack won't work," Freya told him, but he carried on as if she hadn't spoken. "The government, headed by the so-called Stability Coalition, passed the Defender Initiative last week. There were riots in the streets, and with good reason." "None of my business." "You remember Albion? You remember when the government here started surrendering authority to private security firms? We were one more faltering step from living in a totalitarian state, from civil war. Well, now it's playing out in Germany, with their own version of Nigel Cass's shitheads." Freya knew as much. She generally tried to ignore news from her homeland, but her mother remained invested and would regularly lecture her whenever she visited her adopted home in Hackney. A surveillance organisation with paramilitary trappings known as the Verteidiger, the Defenders, had come to prominence over the past few years, and the bill passed in the federal parliament, the Bundestag, by their political allies, had legalised their spying and data harvesting operations. People were calling it undemocratic, and they were right. If a DedSec branch could grow out of Germany's fledgling resistance of hackers, it could...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?